So today we'll take a look at the tracker module from Biset. I will go through the different sections step by step, and since this is quite a deep module, this might be a somewhat longer video, but there are timestamp links so you can skip to the part you find interesting. Now, for those of you who are familiar with trackers, you will enjoy using this module and will feel right at home. And for those of you who are new to this concept, we will really look at this module from the very beginning, so by the end of this video, you will be able to create whole songs with it. I will quickly mention that the developer is already working on some updates, so there might be additional features in the future, but we will really look at everything that's available now so you can directly go experiment with it yourselves. And please, if you like this module or the Biset collection in general, consider supporting the developer. I'm sure this module alone took many hours and many cups of coffee to finish. So if you can donate already directly here from BCV. You right-click the module and under info you have the donate button. So back to the tracker. In its core, a tracker is basically a sequencer like any other sequencer, but it has a few interesting features. For example, we have patterns, we have a sort of a timeline here that we can use to create whole arrangements. I can either play one pattern over and over, right, or as a sort of a clip launcher behavior, I can move two different clips and it will be quantized to the clock. Right, and we have also drums and everything. Right, so like this you can really create whole arrangements, but there are also things like NoteFX that we can add per step. Right, so for example, if I go here to the bass pattern, you see here I have, and we will look at everything later on. I have two rows here, two steps here with C50. This means that this step or these two steps have 50% probability of playing, right? So if I play just this pattern, right, sometimes they will play and sometimes not. Right, and there are many more note effects. You can see this here, all sorts of different randomization, vibrato, tremolo, chance to play, chance to stop, and so on and so forth. There are many more interesting features, so let's really start from the very basics. So let's actually start with the interface and how things work in general. So this is how the module looks like when you first load it up. We can add instruments, which will be basically the instruments that we would like to sequence later on. I just click the plus button here. Right, we can right click them and then change different settings. For example, change the color, we can rename them, set polyphony, set the mode. So if you want to sequence drums and so on. Then we have here the timeline view. Right here we can add patterns or sequences, right? So if I click this again, this plus button, I can add patterns. Also here we have a few different options. Again, we can change the color, we can rename them, change their length, and so on and so forth. Now, if I double click a pattern, here I can start editing it, right? So we have a few columns as you can see here. Each will control a different parameter. So the first one here will be for pitch, for example, and we can change the way we enter notes. By default, you can enter notes with the computer keyboard. Here in the right-click menu, we have the MIDI settings, right? By default, it's set to the computer keyboard, right? So for example, if I hit here the Z key, right? If I click this here, right? And I hit the Z key, we will get the note C, right? X will be the note D, right? And so on and so forth. Like this, I can enter just a sequence, right? Just by clicking the different keys. I can also change here the default octave, right? By default, it will be octave 4. If I take it down to 2, for example, now the notes that I enter will be in the octave C2, right? I can make this even higher to C5, let's say. And I can also change the jump value, so how far it will jump between the steps or between the rows. So now it will advance one row at a time, but if I change this to 4, for example, and I start from the beginning, right, and let's say that on each 4 steps I want to have C5, so I just enter now, as you can see, C5, and it will jump, right, for rows. So instead of just going and moving and always having to click where you want to go, if you know that you want, for example, quarter notes for a kick drum or something like this, you can just set the jump and it will set this for you. Okay, so now I can play this pattern. You can see here we have the button play pattern. Right, and you can see that the sequence will run vertically, which is typical for trackers, right, from up to down. Now I can change the BPM. Right, let me stop this for a second. And another thing that's typical for trackers is the ability to quickly edit things with the keyboard or arrows. So first of all, we need to make sure that we are focused on the tracker, right? You see here there is a yellow light, it says focus light, it's on. If I click outside of the module, you can see it turns off, which means that now the tracker is not in focus. If I click the module itself, if I click the tracker, you can see now again it's in focus, and now I can use the keys, the arrow keys of my keyboard, right, to navigate and quickly move between the steps and make changes if I want to enter different notes, if I want to change the values and so on and so forth. This is something also really typical for trackers, so you can just move along or move through the sequence with the arrow keys. Now there is also some help here in the right-click menu. You can see we have shortcuts for the patterns view. So you can see arrows, move cursor, backspace will clear the line, delete will delete the line, and so on and so forth. So if you don't remember the shortcut, it's here in the right-click menu. You don't need to go to the manual for this. Now another important thing to remember is that you get the full options only when the tracker is not running, right? So here, for example, if I right-click the pattern, we have all sorts of different options, but if I click here, play, I cannot even right-click, this will not even let me open this menu. I have to stop the tracker in order for this to work. The same, for example, with the instruments here. If I right-click the instrument, you can see we have the different options, again, color, rename, and so on and so forth. But if I hit play and I right-click it, we have only a few different options, not the full options. So again, if you want to make changes, make sure to stop the tracker, to stop the sequence, and then you have the full options in the right-click menus. Now, one last thing I want to mention before we start sequencing things is that we have also additional modules, right? If I go down here, right, like the synth module, for example, right, that will allow us to sequence synth voices, or we have the drum module, this will allow us to sequence drums. Of course, we will look at all of them today, so let's finally start sequencing a synth voice. So here I have the FM operator that I would like to sequence with the tracker. Now for this we will need an additional module. This is the T-Synth module. It will look like this. It can be wherever you like in the patch. It doesn't need to be next to the tracker. It's not an expander or anything, but you will need it in order to sequence synth instruments or voices. Right, we have here a few outputs. For example, we have volt per octave and gates. Right, so the volt per octave will sequence speech. I will connect this to the volt per octave of the FM operator and also the gates. Right, we have also a velocity and panning, and we can choose the channel for this voice, right? We can add up to 99 voices, or 100 actually, because we start with 0, 0. Right, and now on the tracker itself, I will add a voice or an instrument. Right, it's already set, as you can see here. Maybe I will zoom in a bit. You can see it's set to channel 0, 0. Right, I can rename this. If I go to the right-click menu, I can rename this FM operator, just so we know what is what, right? And then, as we've seen before, we have to go to the timeline and add a pattern, right? And again, if I double click it, I can start editing it. Now, just to make this easier for me, instead of the computer keyboard, I will use my MIDI keyboard, right? So I will go to the right click menu, I have here MIDI, and I can choose my keyboard, right? That I have it here, so I can enter notes instead of with the keyboard. I have my MIDI keyboard. Right, so now I can start adding a few notes, right? If we look here, I hope you can see everything. Right, I can just start adding notes. Right, maybe something like this. And let's listen to this. Right, so we already have a sequence going on, and just pay attention to the gate output here, right, and also to how the voice sounds like. The gate will stay open until the next note is playing, right? So also here we have the gate on all the time, even though there are no steps. Right, and this is the mode of this synth voice. Again, in the right-click menu, if I go to mode, we have gate, trigger, or drum. In this case, it's on gate, and this is exactly what this mode will do. It will keep the gate open until the next note. But we can also close the gate by entering a note stop line, which will close the gate. And we can do this basically with the spacebar. So if, for example, here I want to close the gate, I just hit spacebar, and you can see it added an empty row or an empty note that will close the gate. So if, for example, I want to close it here in the second time, and now it will sound like this. Right, now let's utilize also velocity, and since we are in the modular environment, we can use velocity to control basically anything. It's another voltage source. So in this case, I will use it to control the feedback amount here on the FM operator, right? So the velocity will go to the feedback input. In the case of the FM operator, I have to open the attenuator to the maximum level that I want it to be modulated to. And now by default, the velocity will be set to 99. Again, we have first the notes, or the column for the notes, and then we have velocity. By the way, you can see this here. We have here the buttons. You can see it says view velocity. If I close this, the velocity disappears. So you can see exactly which column controls velocity. Then we have here panning and so on and so forth. Right, so if you're not sure which column is what, you can just look here. You can see velocity. This is the 99. So by default, it will be set to 99, which is the maximum value. Right, but I will change this for a few notes. So let's say here, for example, I want this to be lower to 50, and then 40, 30, and then let's say 50 again and 99, and then here something a bit similar, it goes down, right? It will just go down in velocity or in feedback amount, right? And now we have this. Right, so we have also velocity changes. Now let's add another voice. I have here a kick all from Befaco. Right, it's already connected to another synth module. I'm using here pitch and gates, and in this case I'm using velocity really for the velocity, for the volume. Right, and also later on we will add some panning to this. So for panning modulation, I'm using here the VCV fade, right? So I can pan this left and right and also modulate this with the tracker. But first of all, we need to add another instrument, another synth here on the tracker. So again, I hit plus, I will name this kick all, right? Just so we know what is what. Even I can change this to a different color, let's say yellow. Right, and now you can see that it's set here to channel 01. Again, the FM operator was 00, and kick all is now 01. And also here on the synth module, we have it set to 01. Of course, I can change this, and I can also click this window, and then I can see exactly what is what. So I'm going to leave this at 01, which will be the channel for kick all. And again, I will add another pattern. Right, so go to the timeline, click plus here, and then go to a new pattern. And I will enter a few notes, and just make sure that you have the instrument selected while entering the notes, and I will show you this later on, right? So I have kick all here highlighted, and then again I can just enter something like this. I just have the notes entered, right? So it will sound like this. Right, and now, first of all, I can change again the velocity. So let's say that I have the first note full with velocity, and then a bit less, right, and then a bit more, and then again 99. Right, and now we have also velocity changes. Right, and again I can set also the panning. So if you are not sure which column is the panning, again we can have a look here. You can see view panning. If I close this, you can see this is the 50 here, so 50 will be in the center, 99 will be panned right, and 0 will be panned left. Right, so let's say that I want here a few notes panned to the right, and then a few notes here panned to the left. Right, if you are with headphones you can hear this quite clearly. Right, so now we also have this sequence with panning variation, and this is how you add synth voices. You add your instrument, you name it, you color it, you choose to use gates or triggers, add a pattern and edit it. Now let me quickly show you what happens when I select a different instrument but stay at in the same pattern. Right, we have here the instrument column, this is the 0, 1, right, we have the kick all here, which is the same channel, but I can change this manually to 0, 0 and have on the same pattern I can have multiple instruments. So for example, let's say that I want a few voices playing with the FM operator, so I just enter 0, 0, right, I can do this manually, and then these notes here will play actually the FM operator, right? Right, so you can have multiple instruments in the same pattern, but you can also do this automatically if you will. If you just highlight, if I highlight now the FM operator, now the notes that I enter will be written with the channel of the FM operator, right? So if I enter now a few notes, right, you can see it's written them with 0, 0 because I have the FM operator here highlighted. Right, so you can have on the same pattern multiple voices or instruments, and just pay attention that you enter notes with the right channel for the synth that you are using. Now soon enough we will deal also with the timeline, but for now let's take this another step forward with more modulation. Okay, so here I have already a sequence going with a kick call from Befako. Right, something like this. And now let's say that I want to add modulation to the decay and the shape of kick all. Right, so here I will right click this pattern. Right, and now I can add a pattern CV column. Right, I will add just one for now, and then I have to click update pattern. Right, and now basically we get another sort of a sequence inside this sequence that we can use for modulation. Right, now if I right click this again, we have a few more options here. So we have a few modes, right? We have CV mode, which is what I would like to use now. And then we have gate and BPM that we will look at later on. Right, I can choose the synth voice. This will affect, again, kick all is 0, 0. So I'm going to leave this at 0, 0. And then I can choose also the channel, and the channel will be basically the output on the synth module. You can see we have 8 outputs, and here it will start from 0 and will go up to 7. So we have the 8 outputs. 0 will be basically output number 1. So again, I will use this output 1, to, for example, modulate the shape. I will take the shape all the way down. And now we can set values from 0 to 999, which will be the CV amount. So let's say that here I would like to start with 0 again, just enter the number 0, right? And then until here it will jump, let's say, to 400, and you can see it has a curve to it. So it will not jump like velocity and panning, it will slowly rise to the values. And let's say that here I will go down a bit, and then here again a bit up. And then let's say here it will go back to 0 and then slowly climb back again and then again go to 0. So we have this curve here going on, right? So it will transition smoothly between the values. Right, so now we have also modulation for the shape. Right, now I want to modulate the decay also, so I will add another CV column here, CV pattern. Again, I have to click update pattern. Right, in this case, I will go with synth channel 1 because I would like to have a separate output. Again, I have to click update pattern column, and now, right, channel 1 is actually output 2. It's a bit confusing, but you get used to it. And this will go to the decay. Again, decay all the way down for now. And also here, I will program a few steps. So let's say I would like here, it will start on 0, but then here somewhere it will climb also, or it will climb already. And then here it will go to 0. And then until here, it will be really high. And then here it will go again to 0, and it will sound like this. Right, so now we have modulation for the shape and modulation for the decay. And we have actually a few more values that we can change. So again, the first one is the CV value itself, the level, the amplitude of the control voltage. But the next one is the curve. So for example, if I change it here from 50 to 99, you can see it's a bit more logarithmic. On the way down, if I change this to 99, it will be more exponential and so on and so forth. So you can really change this, right, and get more different curves. And we have also a delay value, right? The blue here is the delay, and this is true to everything here, right? So I can add delay when this will happen, if it will happen on the step, right, or if it will happen between the steps, right, and actually this will work also on the notes. So let's add this to the notes because you can hear this better. So let's say here I would like this note to be a bit delayed and create some sort of a swing. Right, maybe here another delay. Right, so you can delay notes, you can delay modulation when the modulation will happen. And again, you have here until 99. Now, this is not all, because we can also map modulation to parameters that don't have a CV input. For example, here I have the instruor troika, and I would like to modulate the wave shapes of the two oscillators here, this one and this one here, but there is no CV input, but still we can map this. So let's see how to do this. First of all, I will switch to the pattern of the troika that I have here, right? It will sound like this. You can see I already have here modulation set. And you can see this also here on the scope. I'm using for now just the outputs. Right, but again, there are no CV inputs here on Troika. So what I can do, I right click the synth module, and here we have CV1 to 8. And I can map them, I can change the range, and I can also map them to different parameters. So if I click learn, and I click the parameter, as you can see now, this is so nice. It will move, it will modulate the parameter by mapping it, right? And you can map up to 4 different parameters with each CV output. This is now CV2. And again, you can change the range here also manually, or you have a few presets that you can choose. But now we have also modulation for parameters that don't have a CV input. So now let's have a quick look at Polyphony. Here I already have the FM operator connected. And of course, if you want to use Polyphony, you will need to use polyphonic modules, and the FM operator is indeed polyphonic. Now, if I right click the instrument or this channel, right, I can choose the synth channels, how many channels of polyphony of voices I will have. So in this case, I will go with 3 voices of polyphony, and I have to enter update synth. Right, already you can see the cables are now polyphonic, and we have 3 channels. Also here I have my MIDI keyboard connected. And here is a tip. If you don't have the tracker in focus, you can audition notes without entering them. Right, so if I click outside of the module, it's not in focus, and I can just play this voice without entering any notes. Now, already something we need is to add more note columns to the sequence, so we can really have more than one note playing at a time. So again, I right click it, and then we have pattern notes. For now we have 1 column, and we'll take this up to 3, and then again we have to update the pattern. So now we have 3 note columns that we can use to enter notes. I will start with the first. Let's say here we'll enter just a couple of notes here, write something like this, let's say. Right, and now here I can enter, for example, let's say another note here, and let's say here, and then here. More notes. Right, let's listen to this. Right, so now we have chords basically. Right, we have 3-note chords, we have polyphony of 3 voices. So now let's have a look at the note effects. So for each note, for each line, we can have multiple effects like glide, probability, transposition, and so on, and really add movement to any sequence. Here I have a simple sequence with a VCV, a VCO going through a filter. We sound like this. Just a simple sequence, and let's really start with glide. So glide is already there by default, we just have to change the values. And again, if you don't remember which column is glide, just have a look here down, we have here view glide. If I turn this on and off, you can see this is the column that will control glide, and the higher the value, the shorter the glide. So if, for example, here, or let's say here, I enter a value of, let's say 70, and then here, let's say a value of 50. Let's listen to this. Right, we get glide. Right, so we can add portamento between the different notes. Now this is a simple effect, again it's by default there, but there are more complex things, and there is a menu where you can see exactly what is what. In the right click menu, we have the note effects. You can see the sort of a code that you will have to enter and then exactly what it will do. So let's, for example, start with vibrato on a note or two. Right, so first of all, we need to add an effect column. Again, I right click it, and then here we have column of effects. I'm going to add one and then update the pattern column, and then we have a few more values that we can enter. Right, so let's add vibrato on a few notes. If I look here, we have vibrato will be capital V, and then X will be the speed and Y the amplitude. Right, so if, for example, I want to have vibrato on this one here, I'm going to enter capital V, and then let's say the speed will be something quicker, right? And then let's say 60, and then the amplitude will be 9. Right, so we have vibrato just on this step. Right, we can also add vibrato with randomness. Right, so here in the note effects, we have lowercase v, which is random vibrato, right? Maximum speed, maximum amplitude. So it will randomly add vibrato in each cycle, right? So this will be lowercase v, right? And let's say the maximum, let's say it will go really quickly and again, really high in amplitude. And this will be now random. Right, so each cycle, each time it reaches this note, there will be a different vibrato setting for this note, for this step, for this line only. Now we can also add probability to notes, and let's say that I want to have this note here with a fixed vibrato with probability. Right, so we need to add another effects column because we want to add another effects on the same row. Right, so again, I right click it, column effects, I go with 2. I update this, right, and now I can add more effects. And again, in this case, we have 2 types of chance to play, 2 types of probability, either chance to play or stop. Now, it will not stop the sequence, but it will stop the note, basically closing the gate. So let's try this one. This is a lowercase c, and then the chance is basically the number that we will enter. So lowercase c, and then let's say 50%. So I just enter 50, and now it will sound like this. Right, so if it's not playing, it will also close the gate. And if it does play, we get also vibrato on it, right? You can add more effect columns, up to 16 columns, right? And you have other really interesting effects like random amplitude, random panning, random delay. You can randomize the octaves. You can just pick a different note between a lower note and a higher note. And you have all sorts of different things that you can add movement to your sequences. Okay, so before we move on to sequencing drums, I want to show you how you can change the length of the patterns. So here I have a pattern with the FM operator. It will sound like this. Right, and now by default we have 32 steps to work with, or 32 lines that we can use. Right, this here. Right, but now let's say that I don't want to have a 32-step sequence. I want to have something shorter, like just 16 steps. So I can right-click this pattern, and then we have length in bits and lines per bit. Length is how many bits are in a pattern, and in each bit we can change the number of rows or lines. So now we have 8 bits, right? Starting from 0, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? 7 is the last one, again starting from 0. And you can see that in each bit we have 4 lines or 4 rows, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then another bit, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. Now something good to understand is that the number of lines per bit will act as a sort of a clock resolution. So for example, 4 lines per bit means a clock resolution of 4, which is basically like using a clock multiplication of 4 or getting 16th notes. Right, having only 2 lines per bit will be like using a clock multiplication of 2 or getting 8th notes. And we will see this also soon enough. So let's say that now I want to have only 4 bits, and in each bit we will have 4 lines. So all in all we will have 16 steps. 4 times 4 is 16. So again I will, in this case, go to a new pattern, right, just so we can compare things later on. Right, so now I will have, instead of 8 bits, I will have 4 bits, and I will leave it at 4 lines per bit, and we have to click update pattern. Right now I will enter again some notes. Right, and this is how it will sound like. Right, if we listen to the original sequence, we got exactly the same, but just with 16th notes instead of 32. Right here, this same sequence happens twice. Right here we have 32 notes or steps, and in this case we have 16 steps, but the clock resolution is the same, we still get 16th notes. Now again, the number of lines will control the clock resolution. So if, for example, I want to have also notes in between the notes we have now, I want to have also notes like ratcheting and have notes in between, we have to increase the clock resolution. So again, for this I will use a new pattern, just again so we can compare things. And now instead of 4 lines, I will use 8 lines. So I basically double the clock resolution, right? And update the pattern. And now we have twice the space, basically 32 steps, but they will run also twice as fast. So if I want something like before, I will have to skip a step. So I can set jump, for example, to 2, and then enter the same notes as before. Right, and it will sound like this. Right, so this will be exactly like what we did before. Right, we also have 16 steps, but in this case, what we have now, we have also spaces in between, so we can add notes also in between, for example, here. Right, so we get sorts of ratcheting. Right, so now we have more space between the notes that we can add ratcheting and so on. Now we can also do this the other way around and have a sequence run slower. Again, I will change this to a new pattern. In this case, I still have just 4 bits and 4 lines per bit, so we still have 16 steps, but now I will have only 2 lines per bit, right? So I decrease this to 2. Right, so now we have only 8 steps, but if we want again 16 steps, we need to double the number of bits to 8. So 8 times 2 is 16. Right, so instead of 4 bits, we will have 8 bits, update the pattern. And again, I will deactivate the jump for now and enter the notes. And now when I play this, you will see that it plays twice as slow because we have only 2 lines per beat, right? So now we get 8th notes instead of 16th notes. Right, if I compare this to what we had before, here we have 4 lines per beat, so we get a clock resolution of 4. Here we have 2 lines per beat, so we have a clock resolution of 2. So again, the number of lines per bit acts as a clock resolution. Now, what if you want to have something like a 5-step sequence or a 7-step sequence? Now, this is a bit tricky, and maybe we'll get an update in the future. But for now, if you want to have, let's say, a 5-step sequence, you will have to enter the same notes multiple times. And let me show you this. I will go again to a new pattern here that I have. Right, I still want a clock resolution of 4. I still want 16th notes. So I will leave the lines per beat at 4, but because I want to have a 5-step sequence, I will have to change the beats to 5, right? Update the pattern. Right now, we will enter just 5 notes, right? Because this will be my 5-note sequence, and I will have to enter the same notes until the cycle is complete, right? So I just continue the same 5-step sequence until the end of the cycle. Right, so now I have basically 4 loops or 4 small cycles of a 5-step sequence. Right, now 2 things to keep in mind. First of all, there's a chance that in the future you might be able to copy-paste steps. So this will make this process much easier. But also now you have the chance to make things a bit different with each cycle. Right, you can have, for example, different notes. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, so you can like this change also. You have the chance to change also things. Right, you still have a 5-step sequence, but you just have a few cycles of it, so you can change velocity, change the effects, and so on and so forth. So this is not necessarily a bad thing, but this is how it works for now. So now let's have a look at how we can sequence drums. Also here, we will add a new instrument. Right, in the right-click menu again, and we will have to change the mode. Instead of gate or trigger, we will go with drum, update synth. Right, also here we will add a new pattern, go to the timeline, add a pattern, double-click it in order to edit it. And now in this case, instead of the synth module, we will need the drums module, which is this one here. It's called T-drum. Right, we have here 12 channels that we can use, so we can sequence up to 12 drums. Each one has trigger, velocity, and panning. Also here we have modulation output that again also can also be mapped. So let's see how this will work. If you are familiar with sequencing drums in the DAW, this will be more or less the same. So each note gets a different channel, or each channel gets a different note starting from C4. So we have here will be C4, C sharp 4, D4, D sharp 4, and so on and so forth. So the first channel I will use to trigger the kick drum here that I have here a few modules from Proc. Right, the first one is a bass drum or a kick drum. Right, and now I can set the pattern. Again, channel 1 will be C4. I don't like 4 on the floor kick drums, so I'm not going to program 4 on the floor kick drums. So I'm just going to do something like this. Right, maybe with some variation. Right, something like this. It will sound just like this. Right, so we have a sequence already for the kick drum. Right, and let's say that I want to add also a snare. So the snare will come from channel 2, which is this one here. This will trigger the snare drum. Right, and again, channel 2 will be C sharp 4th. I will enter a few C#4 notes, let's say here, and maybe here a bit in between, right? Something like this. Right, but now I have here also a hi-hat. In this case, it's a closed hi-hat that I want to sequence, but I want it to play also on top of the other notes, right, on top of the other drums. So for this, we need another note column. Again, I right-click this, and then we have pattern notes. We have 1. I will increase this to 2. Update pattern, and now we have here another pattern that we can use specifically for the hi-hats. Right, so this will be channel 3 from the drums module here. This will trigger the hi-hat. Channel 3 will be the note D4. Right, so again, I can just enter a few notes. Let's say something like this. Right, something. Right, so now we have also this closed hi-hat. I have here another module with a sort of an open hi-hat, so the trigger will trigger this one. Right, we need again another note column, so again, right-click. I will add another one, update the pattern. This one will be D#4, again, channel 1 C, C#, D, D#, and so on. So now we have D#. So let's do something like this, for example, add, let's say, 3 notes. Right, so now we have this drum pattern. And again, also here we have velocity that we can use for various things. So let's add some variation to the kick drum here through the X. Right, so the velocity will go to the XCV input. Right, for now it will sound like this. It will take the decay all the way up. Right, but I can start changing things. Again, we have here velocity. So let's say here we'll have something a bit without so longer decay. Right, something like this maybe. Right, I can do this also for the hi-hats. So the velocity for the hi-hats, which is this one, channel 3, will go again to the X. This will also control the decay. So let's take this down for a second, right? If I just hold 0, 0, it will be everywhere 0, 0. And then I can choose, let's say here, to have a bit longer. Right, and also here maybe. Something like this. Also here we can add note effects like probability, for example. Right, so let's add probability to the open hi-hat. Right, again, right-click this pattern. I have to stop the sequence. Right-click this pattern, add an effect column, right? Update the pattern. And now here I can add probability. Let's go with probability is C. So let's say C and 50%. Let's say also here C and C. And let's have here maybe a bit more probability and here a bit less probability. And let's listen to this. Right, sometimes they will play, sometimes not. Right, so this is how you will sequence drums. You start with the note C4, which is channel 1. Then you have velocity, panning, which again you can use basically for anything you want. You have also the note effects. You have again the modulation outputs like we looked at before. And also here they can be mapped and so on and so forth. Okay, so now let's have a look at the timeline and how we can create a whole arrangement. So first of all, let me show you what I have here. I have 2 patterns of a bass voice. Right, in this case, I have, as you can see, only 4 beats. I have velocity variation. In this case, it will control timbre. I have some modulation here that will control decay time. It will sound like this. Right, then I have some drums. Here the pattern is longer with 8 beats. Right, I have a kick and a snare again on the same channel, and I have a hi-hat with lots and lots of variation on the second channel. I have here also another channel that I use to generate glitch. It will sound like this. Right, and again also here I have two patterns, so the second one will sound as follows. Right, then I have a simple lead sound. Right, it has a longer pattern with 16 beats. Just a simple FM voice, nothing too special, right? And it's a longer loop. So now let's have a look at the timeline. In the timeline, we can place patterns and create a whole arrangement, and we can also use this as a sort of a clip launcher that we will see soon enough. Now let's start with the bass. Let's say that this track, this arrangement will start with 3 patterns of the bass pattern 1, right? So to add a pattern, you click the pattern you want to add, you highlight it, and then you click anywhere here on the timeline, and it will add this pattern, and then you can drag it wherever you want. So left to right is time, and the vertical here, you can choose whatever you want. It doesn't have to be even on the same lane. I can do something like this, even if I want. Right, let me just delete this. In the right-click menu, I can delete patterns. Right, so now I have pattern 1, but I want it to repeat 3 times. So all I have to do is stretch it. I just grab the end here and I can stretch it over the length of 3 bars. And you can see we have here dotted lines here that tell us that this is looping. And then I can add the second pattern. Again, I highlight the pattern I want to add and I click anywhere, and then I can just grab it and drag it wherever I want. Right, so now if I hit play song, it will start playing these 3 cycles of the first pattern and then 1 cycle of the second pattern, and then it will repeat itself. Here I have play song. Right, just like this. And now let's continue this also with the other voices. So I will add the first drum pattern. Again, I highlight it, click anywhere here. I can edit, I can put this anywhere I want, but just for this example, I will put it on the second lane. Right, and then I can add also the second pattern here, and then make the same with the bass. So again, pattern 1 for 3 bars, and then pattern 2. And then we can add also the lead, so pattern 1, and then pattern 2, right? I just click it and click anywhere on the timeline, and then this will just add the patterns, right? So twice pattern 1 of the drums, twice pattern 2 of the drums, and then again we have pattern 1 of the bass for 3 bars, and again pattern 1 for 3 bars, and then we have pattern 2. And let's say that this arrangement, just for fun, will end just with the bass by itself for 2 cycles. And now what I will do, I will add just a sort of a dummy pattern, an empty pattern at the end, just so things will not loop here from the, right, they will not go back to the beginning. Right, I will add this pattern here at the end, just so it's not looping. Just for fun, I have here some visuals. Let's see if this will work. And let's hit play and listen to this. I want to quickly show you how you can use the timeline as a clip launcher. Now I have here a few sort of islands with different combinations of patterns, right? So I have here the bass pattern 1, bass pattern too, and then I have here a different sort of micro arrangement, bass and drums, and then here bass, drums, and a lead. Right, so I can start looping, for example, the first pattern. If I just click it here on the timeline, and instead of hitting play, I hit play pattern. Right, it will continue looping like this until I select a different pattern, and everything will be quantized to the next clip. So it will start only when the first clip finished. Right, so let's say I want to move now to the second pattern here. I can click it, and then only when the first one finished, then it will move to the second one. Just like this. Right, so you can use this as a sort of a clip launcher. Now, when there are patterns that have different lengths, it will stop after the pattern ended. If you can see here, right, I have two patterns of drums, but the pattern of the bass is longer, and then we have a shorter bass pattern. So if I select, for example, the drums pattern, right, it will loop from this pattern, right, and this is of course not what we want. We want to loop the whole sort of micro arrangement here. So for this we can use again a dummy pattern that will set the overall length. Here I have a pattern called loop, right, I can just add it again wherever I want, and then I just stretch it to the overall length that I want to loop. I can do this, I can do the same also here, right? And then again, instead of launching the clip with the drums, I will launch it with the loop. So now it will loop this whole length, right? So if I start again from the bass, I will sort of jam this a bit, and you can see how it's switching or launching the different clips quantized to the last one. So I want to quickly go over tuning and live recording. Here I have a simple pattern with only one note or the same note on all steps. It will sound like this. Right, but there is also a note effect, this one here, that will pick a random note. You can choose between which notes here, right? This is capital N. So I'm just going to enter this right quickly for all of the notes, just random values here. And now if I hit play, right, we get random notes that are not quantized to anything, but we can quantize this to a scale. So in the right-click menu, we have a few options for tuning. First of all, we can change the bass pitch. So if you don't want to have A440, you want to have A432, for example. Right, you can change this here, and we can also change the scale. You can change each note independently, or you have preset scales, for example, this one, of course. Right, and now it will change all of the tunings, and everything will be quantized now to this scale. So if I hit now play, right, everything is tuned now to the scale or quantized to the scale that I chose. Now I want to show you also live recording. I will quickly just switch the pattern here. Right now, if I hit play, I can activate here. You can see record, right? And you can see here also record light turned on. And now I can enter notes, and they will be placed according to where the playhead is. And it will also automatically add delay, so it will all be sort of unquantized, right? So I can just enter a few notes. Right, and you can see if I remove the recording, you can see it added delay automatically. Maybe in the future it will also add velocity, so maybe it will also record velocity. Maybe it will also record the polyphony in the future update. But for now you can like this, just jam and record your things and then go and change them, right, and live record patterns and sequences. So now I want to start showing you the different modules that come with the tracker. The first one is the T control. This module will allow us to control the tracker with external signals like a clock, for example. So here I have a simple pattern set with the FM operator. It will sound like this. Right, it goes also through some delay. Right, but now I want to add, let's say, other elements to this patch and use an external clock. So for this, we can use the T control module. We can choose the clock resolution here. Right, I will stay with 24, which means that I have to use a clock multiplication of 24 to run it. This will work quite nicely with clocked, right, with clocked from impromptu. So the clock will go to the Opalach, to the clock input. I will use also the reset and also the run, so the tracker knows when it should start running. This is of course also quite useful in using this as a VST in a DAW and syncing everything to the DAW. So now when I hit run on clocked, also the tracker will run according to the BPM here. Now the delay is also nicely in sync. And I have here another element that is running with a different sequencer, right, a bass with kick all from Befako, and it will be in sync with the tracker. Right, now we can choose here how to run the tracker. You can use either a trigger or a gate, and you can choose also to run just the pattern or the whole song. And another interesting thing here is that we have also pattern control. So on the tracker, I have here for this voice a few patterns, as you can see, right, and I can switch them directly from the module itself. Right, let me run clocked again. Right, have a look also here, and I can switch between them. Of course, this can happen also with external triggers, and we have also this one here, which will randomly select a pattern. So also this I can do with an external signal. I will do this with a clock division of 4. Right, and now it will switch between the patterns randomly, which is quite fun. By the way, let me stop this for a second. You can also use a phase signal to run the tracker. So if you are using something like the phaser collection from Hetrix CV or just various CV sources, you can drive this also with the phase signal. Another useful module is the T-clock that will give you access to clock divisions and multiplications synced to the tracker, right? So here I have a pattern going with kickall from Befako. Right, so the first thing I can do, I can use this T-clock to sync the delay, right? I can just send the multiplication of 1, which is basically the clock itself, to the delay. Right, and now it's a sync delay. I can also sync other sequencers or drive other sequencers. I have here 2 slips sequencers. One is driving the Pony VCO. One is sort of an FM voice. Right, so for example, if I want a multiplication of 2, right, this can drive 1 slips. And again, it will be synced to the tracker. And another one, a multiplication. Let's say also a multiplication of 2, because there is another thing I want to show you. Right, I'm using a different output. Right, because now I can change the phase, for example. Right, so the starting point. Right, we can also change the pulse width. We can also add swing. Right, so you have 4 outputs like this that you can control. And another interesting and very useful module is the T-state, this one here. So first of all, it will give you visual representation of what's going on the tracker. You can see we have just one voice. Sometimes it's higher in pitch, sometimes lower in pitch, higher in velocity, lower in velocity, right? So you can see if you have multiple voices, you can see this also here. But it has also quite useful outputs here. So first of all, the gate output, as long as the tracker is playing, it will output a high gate. If I stop the tracker, you can see the gate goes down. Right, so this is already quite useful. And also we have a play trigger output, a stop trigger output, and both, so play and stop, which is great for resetting things. So let's say now I stop the tracker starts from step 1, but both slips will just continue from where they stopped, but I can use the, let's say, the both output to reset them. Right, so if I hit stop, they will reset. If I hit play, they will start from step 1. Right, and like this, everything will stay in sync. Another quite interesting module is the T-phase. This will output basically synced LFOs, again synced to the tracker. So if I look, for example, at the first one, you see we have a raising saw. I can change the shape. Right, it can be a triangle. I can change the multiplication and division. Again, I can change the phase. I can do all sorts of different things here. Change the slopes, right? I can invert this. Instead of going up and down, it can go down and up. I can scale this unipolar, bipolar, and so on and so forth. Right, and of course, this is synced also to the tracker. So here I have the octaves VCO from Befeco, and I can start modulating things, for example, with these LFOs. Right, again, they are synced. Right, sync to the tracker. Let's have another one opening the filter. Right, so like this you can have synced LFOs or synced phase signal and use them throughout your patch. And again, changing the phase, warping them, right, inverting them. You can offset them to be bipolar or unipolar and so on and so forth. So the last module I want to show you is the T-Quant that will quantize external signals to the scale settings of the tracker. So here I already have a sequence ready just with the VCV VCO, which will sound like this. Right, nothing too special, but it is quantized to the base pitch of 432, and I have a certain scale selected. Right, and here I have another sequencer. This is the 8-step sequencer from Quant Modular. Right, so first of all, let's just listen to this. I will run it with the multiplied by 2 clock. Right, let me take the VCA a bit down here. Right, just so we can listen to this. Now, if I connect just the T-Quant without the sequence still, you will hear. Right, you will hear, and you can see it here also, it will go down in pitch minus 0.026 volt, and this is because I have the base pitch set lower than 440. So already, even without connecting anything in the input, already it will quantize to the settings. But now I can also connect the sequencer. Right, and now this sequence will be quantized to the settings of the quantization of the scale of the tracker. I want to show you quickly one more thing, and that's it for today. If you remember from the segment about CV sequences or CV modulation, we saw also 2 more modes. Right here we have the CV mode. This will be just a rising and falling CV value. There is also gate mode, so instead of rising and falling or with a slope, it will just open and close. But there is also BPM mode, which will allow you to change the BPM per step, which is quite quite cool. So I'm going to choose this and update pattern column. Right here I have a sequence ready. Right, and now I'm going to add some movement to it. So first of all, I want this to be in overall a lower BPM. I want it to be 75, so I enter 0.75. Right, so now everything that comes after it will be 0.75, but here, for example, I can enter a bit of a ritardando, I guess, so it will slow down. Let's say 0.60 and then 0.55, then 0.60, 0.65 and 75. Right here I will go again with 75. Right, so it will have a sort of a hiccup, a sort of a slowing down to it. And I can do the same here. So let's say 75, 70, 65, 60, and 55. Right, and like this you can change the BPM per step, right, which is quite cool. You can create very organic sequences, very organic loops. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. Thank you again, Biset, for making such a beautiful module and available for free. I'm going to play this little thing that I prepared. Cheers.